Hello everyone, today I'm going to teach you how to create this very cool portal transaction scene in which you will learn how to create a very cool 3D objects and how to control the track matte functions to create this portal illusion. So let's get started. Alright, so let's create our first composition. We can call it master comp. Let's work in a full HD format. Set the duration to 10 seconds and the color for the background to black. And now the first thing we will create is the 3D coin. For this, let's select the ellipse tool and choose to fill it with the solid color. Now let's enter the color and choose some orange color. Next, let's turn off the stroke for this shape and now hold down the shift key and create an ellipse. Now let's open the ellipse path and set the size to 500. Finally, press enter on the layer and change the name to main. Now let's select this layer and align it to the center of the composition. And now let's duplicate the shape using Ctrl D and change the name to stroke. For this shape, turn off the fill color and turn on the stroke color. You can use the eyedropper tool to select the main shape color and now go and brighten this color a little bit. Next, let's select the text tool and create the $sign. We can color it the same color as the stroke. Now let's align it to the center of the composition. And now let's convert this layer to a shape layer and delete the text layer we have here. Now let's press enter and adjust the name. Great, and now let's select the anchor point and place the anchor point of this layer to the center while holding the Control or Command key. So it will snap to the center of this layer. Great, we can go back to selection tool and now let's press S, scale this layer a little bit. Awesome, and now let's convert this design to a 3D coin. For this, we need to activate the 3D function for all the layers. If you can see it, click here and now click on this icon to convert all the layers to a 3D layers. Next, we need to change the renderer to a Cinema 4D renderer so we can turn these layers to a real 3D objects. You can also access the Cinema 4D renderer by clicking on the preview screen and pressing Ctrl key to enter the composition settings. Then go to 3D renderer and choose Cinema 4D. Great, and now make sure no layer is selected and search for depth in the search bar. Now let's switch the view to costume view 1 so we can see what we're doing. Now let's change the extrusion depth for this layer to, let's say, 60. And for the stroke we can set it to 80. For the $sign we can set it to 20. Great, and now if I'll zoom in, you will see that we have some visual distractions, and it's because all the layers are overlapping on each other. To avoid it, first let's start with the $sign. So let's select this layer and press P, and now let's move this layer on the Z axis, like that. We can set it to -10 for now. And now let's add some color to the sides of this shape. For this, let's open the contents, select the $signs from here, click on add, go to side and select color. Now we can sample the color of the main shape and then darken it a bit so it will look like a shadow. Alright, so now I want to move this layer a little bit more in the Z axis so it will pop up a bit more. I think -15 will be great. Alright, and now we can parent this layer to the main shape because we know that we're going to move the main shape and rotate it, and we want all the layers to move along with it. Yeah, and next let's switch the view to top view to see the scene from the top. And now let's adjust the anchor point of the main shape and move it to the center. Let's move it 30 pixels because this way it's going to be exactly in the center of this 3D shape, because we set earlier the extrusion depth to 60. So if we place the anchor point to 30, it will be exactly in the center. Let's do the same for the stroke layer, but this time we need to move the anchor point 40 points because the extrusion depth for this layer is 80 and 40 is exactly in the middle of 80. And now let's move this shape to the center of the stroke layer. So we can move it for 10 points. It's going to be exactly in the center. Great, and now we can go back to custom view 1 and let's parent the stroke to the main shape as well. And now let's add some color to this shape as we did for the dollar sign. And this time we can sample the side color of the dollar sign. So now if we will rotate this layer, all the layers will be rotated as well. And the last thing we want to do is to duplicate the dollar sign and move it on a Z-axis so we can see this layer in the back of the coin. If you don't know how much to move this layer, we can switch the view to top view and see if the layers are placed symmetrically. So now I understand that I moved this layer a bit too much, so I bring it back. 45 looks good. Alright, let's go back to the active camera and start to animate this layer. For this, we will use the rotation properties. For this, let's set the Z-axis to 35 and the Y-axis to 45. And now we will animate the X-axis. So make sure you're at the beginning of the animation and create the first keyframe. Now let's move to second number 4 and make this layer to rotate 2 times. And let's see how it looks. If your computer are struggling to render the preview screen, you can set the preview to quarter. You can go to the preview tab, select the composition and set the preview rendering to skip 1 frame. And that's how you can see the animation more quicker, just to check that the rotation looks good. Once you're good with the rotation, we can bring the preview rendering back to normal and bring the preview quality back to full. Next thing we need to do is we need to pre-compose all these layers. Let's call this coin comp, make sure both are selected. And now let's enter this pre-comp and crop the sides of this comp because we have too much unnecessary space here. For this, let's press Ctrl K and set the width and the height for this comp to 600. Let's make sure we not scale this too much. Yeah, I think it's good. Alright, and now let's go back to master comp, and to make the project work faster, we can set the master comp renderer to a regular classic 3D renderer. As you can see, everything looks great. And now let's move on and create our logo. So for this, we can duplicate the coin comp. Let's enter this comp and change the name of this comp to a logo comp. And now we can actually delete all these layers. And now let's import some logo. I will use the After Effects logo for this one. And so you can change the logo much easier in the future. Let's create a new composition using Control or Command N. Let's call it logo. Let's set the width and the height to 600 as well. And let's add the logo we have to this comp. Let me just scale down my logo. All right, I think 25 is great. And now let's add this comp we just created to our logo comp. And now let's create the 3D shape for this logo. So I will use the rectangle tool. Now make sure no layer is selected. And let's choose some solid color for this layer. I will sample this purple bright color, and I will turn off the stroke for this shape that I'm going to create. And now let's double click on the rectangle tool. It will create a shape with the size of the comp. Now let's move this layer down, and now let's open the rectangle path and change the roundness. Actually, I think we need to scale down the size of this rectangle, I think 500. Now let's set the roundness to 90. And now let's scale down our logo as well. Alright, this looks better. And now let's convert all these layers to a 3D object as we did with the coin. And now let's switch to costume view 1 and add a depth to the shape we have here. So let's open this layer and go to geometry options. And now let's increase the extrusion depth to, let's say, 100. And now let's select the logo comp, press P, and move this layer 1 point forward, which is -1, so it will not overlap with the shape layer we have. Next, let's parent the logo to the shape. And now let's change the view to top view and center the anchor point of the shape to the center. So let's use the anchor point and move the anchor point to 50, because 50 is great. And now let's use the title safe action grid to move the layer exactly into the center of this comp. Now I remember that I didn't do it with the coin comp, so if you want, you can enter the coin comp and open the grid so you can see the center of this comp and move the main shape of the comp to the center of this pre-comp. Alright, and now let's go back to our logo comp, and we can now go back to active camera and turn off the grid. And now let's create the same rotation animation as we did for the coin. So first let's set the z-axis to 35, the y-axis to 45. Now let's animate the x-axis. So exactly as we did for the coin, 2 full rotations. Alright, I think it's the main shape is too big. So let's select this layer and press S and scale this layer a little bit. 90 looks great. Yeah, that's awesome. Alright, and now let's duplicate the logo and move it in the Z-axis to see the logo in the back of this shape. Let's set the Z-axis to 101. Great, and now let's reopen the shape layer and select the rectangle from the contents and add a side color for this shape. Let's sample this color and darken it a bit. Great, so now we have created our 3D objects and we can move on to create the portal. Alright, so first we need to make sure node layer is selected, and now let's go and select the ellipse tool and create an ellipse while holding the shift key. Now let's open the ellipse path and uncheck the chain function so we can set a different size for the shape. Next, let's select this layer and change the fill color to a gradient color. Now let's open the gradient, and to control the gradient we need to switch back to selection tool, and now we can see the handles of this gradient. So let's move this handle right here. And now let's enter the gradient and click the first color and make sure to go to the opacity of this color to set it to 100 so we can see actually the color. Now let's pick some purple color. Next, let's click on the second color and choose some darker purple color like this one, and just make sure the opacity is set to 100. Great. Next, let's select this ellipse and press Ctrl or Command D to duplicate it. Let's move the new ellipse to the side Now let's open the proportional grid and place the two of the shapes symmetrically in the pre-comp. Alright, we can turn this grid off. Alright, and now let's just flip the handles of this gradient. So we will get the opposite gradient, like this one. Nice. And now let's select the anchor point tool and while holding the Control or Command key, place the anchor point to the center of this layer. We can go back to the selection tool and now let's align this layer to the center of the composition. Great. Let's change the name to portal. Alright, and now I will teach you how to create the portal illusion. For this, we need to duplicate our portal. So let's select it and press Ctrl D. Let's change the name to portal matte. And now let's change the shape of this layer to use it as a matte or a mask to create the illusion. I'll show you what I mean. So first, let's open up the contents of this layer and we can delete the second ellipse. Now let's select the first ellipse we got here and select the pen tool. Now I want us to create additional point on this shape to able to change the shape of this ellipse. To able to add additional points, we need to open the ellipse. We need to right click on the ellipse path and convert it to a Bezier path. Now, while the pen tool are selected, we can hover over the path and add additional point. Let's add 2 points here. Now let's go down and add 2 additional points here. Now let's select this point, the middle one and the right one. Now move these points to the right, like so. And now we can change the fill color to a solid color and not a gradient color. Let's set the color to white for now. And now let's turn on the coin comp and click here to see the track matte functions. Next, let's use the pick whip of the track matte functions and drag it to the portal matte we have here. Now let's move this layer above all the layers. Now let's select the selection tool, and as you can see, if we will move this layer to the sides, this layer will be visible only within the portal matte we just created. And this is how we created an illusion of the portal. So you can use this method to create some inner portal animation. But now let's learn how to create an illusion for the portal where the objects is entering one side and going out from the other side. So I will bring all back to normal. Let's turn off this pre-comp for now. And now let's turn back on the portal matte. And we will move this layer to the side here. So it will be placed exactly where the left portal is. And now let's select the pen tool and select one of the points. Now let's hold down the Alt or the Option key and select the other points and move them to the left, like this. So now, if we'll turn on this layer, let's place it above it. And now let's set it to the alpha matte of the portal matte layer. This will create the illusion that the object is entering the portal, like this. But if I'll move this layer up, as you can see, we will not see the upper part of the coin, because we will seeing the coin only in the borders of the shape of the portal matte. To fix this, all you need to do is just to select the portal matte shape, and using the pen tool adjust the shape of this layer, something like this. Alright, and now you have more space for the object to fly around. So now I will cancel the matte function for this layer because I want the coin to get out from this side. So I'll place it here. And now let's bring the logo comp here and turn it on and set the logo comp to be an alpha for the portal matte we just created for the left side, like this. Great. And now let's do the same to the right portal we have here. It is very easy to do. All we need to do is just duplicate the portal matte we have here. Now let's turn this layer on, then right click, go to transform and choose flip horizontally. And now let's move this layer to the right so it will be placed exactly in the area of the right portal right here. And now let's set the coin comp to be an alpha of this layer. Great. So now if I'll move this the coin, I will see it only in the area of the portal matte 2 layer. Alright, and now let's animate the 3D objects we have here. So let's select both of the layers, go to align, and let's make sure we align it to the composition. Let's press S to scale these layers down a little bit. Great. And now we can press P to see the position property. Make sure you're at the beginning of the timeline. Let's move these layers here and create the first keyframe. Now let's move to second number 4 and move these layers to the right like this. Let's see what we got. Yeah, so great, it looks awesome. And now let's create the lighting animation. For this we can use this layer, so let's press Ctrl D to duplicate it. Now let's turn it on and add a gradient fill to this layer. And let's adjust the gradient like this. And now let's enter the gradient and set the opacity for the first color to be a 0 like this. And the second color, let's set it to a brighter purple. And now let's click here and change the blending mode to overlay. Next, let's change the name of this layer to light 2 because this belongs to the portal matte 2. And now let's press T and create some opacity animation. At the beginning, let's set the opacity to 0 and create the first keyframe in the beginning of the animation. Now let's move 15 frames and set the opacity to 100. Now let's select both of the keyframes and press Ctrl C to copy them. Next, let's move to second number 1 and press Ctrl V to paste them here. Now let's select these 3 keyframes and press Ctrl C to copy them. Move to second number 2 and hit Ctrl V to paste the keyframes. Let's do it one more time. Now let's move to second 3 and 50 frames and press Ctrl V once again. Great. And now let's just delete the last keyframe so the animation will end at second number 4. Next, let's select all the layers, right click, go to keyframe assistance and easy ease these layers to get a nicer animation. Great. And now let's just duplicate this layer, change the name and right click on it, go to transform and flip it horizontally and finally move it to the area of the left portal right here. Great, so now you see we have some cool glowing animation which can work with the transparency background. Right, and now let's make this animation a little bit more interesting by duplicating this layer. So first let's duplicate the logo comp, go to the beginning of the animation, press U to see the keyframes. And now let's adjust the first keyframe by moving this layer up. Now let's duplicate the logo comp once again and adjust the first keyframe so this comp will start from the bottom. Alright, now let's just move the layer that goes from the center above all the new logo comps so it will be in front. Now we can select both of the layers, press S and adjust the size of this layer. So let's set the upper layer to let's say 40 or 50 and the second one let's set to 60. And now let's create a small offset between the animation. So let's go to frame 50 and move the bottom layer here. Next let's go to second number 1 and move the upper layer to start from here. I'll just place this layer down here. It will look more organized like this. It looks great. Now let's select all the logo comps and tag them in a different color. And now let's do the same with the coin comp, but first we can tag this layer with the different color. Now let's press U to see the keyframes of these layers, and let's place the time indicator at the second keyframe. Now let's duplicate this layer and adjust the position of the end of this animation. Now let's duplicate this layer once again and place it down here. Now let's press S and adjust the size of this layer, but before this, let's place these two layers down here. So the coin in the center will be in front. Now let's scale this layer to 60 and this one to 50. Great, and now let's create the same offset for the layers. So this comp will start from frame 50 and this one from second number 1. Yeah, and with this we have finished the tutorial. I hope you learned something new today, and I see you in the next one.